Okay, yes, my name is Dottie Vera-Wise. I've lived here in Urbana for about 7 years. And I've been very concerned about the incident that happened on April 10th and all the many weaknesses that it showed in the system here. In general, the expectation that consultants have is that they should bring a report that supports what they think the city wants to hear. And so I think that they did that in two ways, that they basically cleared the uh, officers of wrongdoing, and because they followed policies, and they recognized that the use of force policies are not adequate. Um, and of the 18 recommendations, about half of them do address the use of force. I think it's a real severe problem with the use of force recommendations, because by not including de-escalation as one of the foundations, it really set things up that both the police officers and Ms. Lewis were acting out of a sense of fear and desperation and self-preservation as they were moving forward. And this was contributing to a lot of the problematic actions that happened. So it's not just a matter of changing the use of force policies, but more importantly, changing the culture in the police, that they need to be expecting to approach the civilians differently and not be always escalating problems that are occurring. And there were a couple of specific recommendations that I think are worth noting. One is that they expect that there will be a verbal discussion by the supervisors reviewing the use of force with the officer involved, and that can be an opportunity for thinking of what could have been done differently the next time, including presumably escalation and actions like that. And then also the importance of training, so people, as Cherise suggested, well, what kinds of phrases are more useful and productive as a situation evolves. So I think that this is really promising in this sense, but I'm real concerned that, as happened with the county consultants very often, that there were great recommendations made, but they often weren't followed. So I think it's going to be really important for council members to be involved actively in continuing to push for these things. One of the things that Chief Serafin commented on was that they use Lexapol as a source of model policies. And there was just a report on NPR today on the Here and Now section on Lexapol as providing suggestions and wording that makes it less likely for police to be held accountable by saying things not that officers shall follow this procedure, but they should. And also that that in using deadly force, there should be not a requirement for an immediate threat to life and safety, but for an imminent threat, which again allows for more wiggle room in that. And so I really hope that those things will be taken into account rather than accepting the model, quote, model policies that they provide as written. And finally, I was glad to hear the description of the amount of editing that the city was allowed to do, that it wasn't a way for disagreeing with the conclusions and recommendations, but rather just for clarification of details, as were mentioned. So I want to say again what I said at the beginning, which is that I was very upset at the episodes and the many different tapes that I saw at the beginning of the incident with Miss Lewis. And appalled by it and really think that it deserves the continued deep review and changes that have been discussed tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dottie. Next up is Laura Orr.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi. So my name is Laura Orr. Some of you have heard me speak and know me from other community organizations. And so I tonight wanted to first start by thanking Bill Brown and Jared Miller for standing up for public input and its importance in this conversation and not trying to push it back and suppress those of us that are homeschooling, working from home, doing everything from home, and really trying to still advocate for our community and finding it equally challenging, at all hours of the evening to share our thoughts and comments. So appreciate you two standing up for our voices. So I'll get to it. Council and Mayor, I urge you tonight to see the blatant parallels between the lack of accountability and oversight on the use of force policy in the Urbana Police Department and how this spills into the lives of so many with such dangerous implications in our schools. Now you're holding on to an idea that earlier thoughts and decisions were, quote, right in regards to the Aleyah Lewis case. And this morning on the local news, I heard a quote from Diane Marlin that she did not want to dwell on it any longer. Can you imagine if Aleyah and her family had the luxury to no longer dwell on the disturbing way she was treated? To both council members and to the mayor, you not only have the luxury, you have the duty to make this right for Miss Lewis after this review. Surely, no doubt, this council is able to heed the reports, data, and input from more than one questionable independent review. You have the power here, and you can put a stop to this form of systemic racism. I ask you to do the same with the intergovernmental agreement that you entered into last fall with USD 116 to place armed police officers in our schools. This agreement needs to be canceled not only because of its moral shortfalls, but also because of its budgetary shortfalls. The Urbana School District faces a budget shortfall of $1.5 million in the 2020-2021 school year, and they cannot afford to spend $327,000 to pay the city for armed police officers to police an empty school. Last week on September 1st, Ann Hall, the president of the Urbana School Board, made a statement in support of canceling the SRO contract with the city. However, most of the school board members are afraid of being sued by the city. We ask the city council to send a clear signal that you won't be an obstacle in removing the SROs from Urbana schools. The funding of SROs has been a disservice to the people of Urbana, and while the city council is in no way solely responsible, this council has more information to work with now than the school board had when putting this briefly worded agreement together in 2019. I highly encourage this council to take this opportunity to put this additional knowledge to work by advocating for the cancellation of this agreement. This intergovernmental agreement was rushed from the beginning despite various misstatements to the contrary. And now more than ever, the agreement continues to be a misuse of needed resources that could be better supporting students in our community. Like the depth and breadth of calls to do better for Aleyah Lewis, I hear those same calls for the removal of our SROs from the schools. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Laura. Next up is Alan Axelrod.
Right in the middle of my oatmeal. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So I want to touch on two different things with the time that I have available tonight. The first one is going to be about the conversation that we had tonight and two elements that are noticeably missing. The first element is that we have to talk about Chief Seraphin. On the day that you all, as the City Council, reappointed Chief Seraphin, you talked about that being a conditional reappointment since he is an at-will employee and his appointment can be reviewed at any time. And part of the police chief's duty is to craft policies for his officers. The Hillard Heintze presentation provided recommendations and shortfalls. Why don't we have a proactive crafting of policy by the person who is in charge of our police force? Why was it so obviously behind? Who further said on April 27th that de-escalation was inappropriate because a gun was present. The Hillard Heintze presentation talked about a lot, but I failed to see any specific mention about de-escalation being appropriate in the condition that someone had a gun. Because in the event that it doesn't, we allow this exact same thing to happen again. So that is a review of two things. To include in the discussion Chief Seraphin's continuation as police chief or not, and how this should be reflected in his review process. And the second one is specifically making sure that this review process that thousands of dollars has been spent on actually addresses one of the core specific issues, which is de-escalation even when the police believe there to be a gun to be present. Now I'm going to segue to something that's more amicable to the City Council. It is a much broader issue than the scope of this council meeting tonight. Ameren, Illinois is still trying to shut off people's power. The No Ameren Shutoffs campaign, which is what I've been leading since July, now composes over 26 organizations. I do not have the time to list them all and get to my point. But the main thing that I want to talk about is, what do you all think of when you hear September 11th? Because it's about to have an additional aspect. Ameren, Illinois has sent shutoff notices dated September 11th, which is going to cause a bunch of problems, not just because it is throwing insult to injury for people who are suffering. It opens you all up to federal lawsuits, just like the Decatur public school system was open to a federal lawsuit when their school system denied part of their population access to an education in late October of last year. It also will hurt you when it comes to the census. There are over 2 weeks left in the census, and people, among other things, can fill out the census online. How can you do that without power? On top of that, Illinois American Water has sent an email where they said they wanted to disconnect water. The services listed that have said how many people are going to be disconnected are NICOR and the city of Springfield. NICOR said 152,000 customers are more than 60 days overdue with their balance. Springfield alone has over 11,000 households at risk of shutoffs. The state of Illinois is the fourth most at risk for large numbers of households. It's over 400,000 based off a graph that I've seen at risk of utility shutoffs. I appreciate and applaud the mayor for actually talking to the governor about utility shutoffs. Thank you for doing that. Tomorrow, we're going to have elected representatives and candidates alongside many of our community organizations talking to the Illinois Commerce Commission to further agitate for extending the utility shutoffs moratorium. But we need more action here. We need you all to send messages in your capacity as public officials to the governor. We need you in your public capacity to ask that he use the executive order powers that the Illinois Commerce Commission told us last Monday he has always had the power to do, to avoid utility shutoffs on September 11th. We've been talking to you about this for weeks and weeks, possibly over a month now, and you have been making motions, but unfortunately they are too slow to address the urgent issue at hand. So please contact the governor so that we don't have to worry about Champaign and Urbana having their power shut off. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up is just identified as a number. It's area code 217 and it ends in 552. Can you identify yourself, please?
And since you're on the phone, you'll need to press *6 to unmute.
Hello, can you
There you go.
hear me? All right.
Can you identify
Yes.
yourself, please?
I am Nate Wall, and I find it unacceptable that the presentation on the justification in the actions of 2 police officers was put prior to personal public input. That was hurtful, and it was not expected. However, I do appreciate Jared and Mr. Brown advocating for our ability to speak tonight. I've lived in Urbana for 31 years. All of my life, except for the first 5 months of it. I have 2 15-year-old black sons who both attend Urbana High School. I am proud to have graduated from Urbana High School in 2007. Many social issues affecting black people have become very public this year, as more incidents are recorded on videos, such as murders of unarmed black men and women, and unequal treatment by the police in general. This has sparked a new awareness in many Americans that racial injustice is very real and has a 400-year-old history here in the U.S. Black citizens, including my son, both of them, have been aware of this all of their lives. And living through it produces ongoing trauma. However, as racial injustice has been in the forefront of the news lately, the trauma to black and brown students has been exacerbated. I urge the city to cancel the contract you have with USD 116, which employs 2 school resource officers. The presence of armed officers in the schools could trigger the amygdala in the brains of the black and brown students, which is responsible for fight or flight. In this state, students will not be able to access their prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive functioning. In short, they will not be able to learn effectively. It is irresponsible of you, to the council, the city council, to continue a contract that allocates $327,000 of school budget monies, which should be used to support and enhance student learning instead of further traumatizing black and brown youth. Instead, I will ask you to focus your attention on the future leaders of Urbana, of our future leaders of Urbana. Which does Urbana value more? Policing students or investing in them? Investing in students looks like a variety of things. Hiring more social workers, providing district employees with training and trauma-informed practices, hiring more black and brown educators, and other actions which give students the tools necessary to navigate through their middle and high school experiences. Of course, I understand that the previously mentioned actions I desire to see in schools are not the responsibility of City Council. However, an action you can take and should is to cancel the SRO contract you have with Urbana School District 116. The success of many students depend on it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wall. Next up is Christopher Hanson.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Christopher Hanson, and I've lived in Urbana for 18 years. I wanted to start by commenting on something that Bill Colebrook said at the last city council meeting. Marlon's new executive orders regarding gatherings during the pandemic were being discussed, and it was made rather clear by members of the public that these orders were an overreach and were going to disproportionately affect poor people. The new laws presume guilt upon any group greater than 4 people, and then requires those people to show their residency papers or prove their family relationships to police officers. We are in an era where the last thing we need right now is more friction between police officers and civilians, and you just passed laws that would create exactly these types of altercations that we should be trying to avoid. And it is exactly this type of law that has the ability to be maximally destructive to people who live in more affordable, higher density living situations and to people who have instability in their housing. Some of these people have no ability to prove their residency to a police officer. Now, Jared Miller was the only person, it seemed, who saw the problem here. And what upset me was that Bill Colebrook's outlook on passing a shitty law like this was that residents who are adversely affected can simply escalate things to an appeals court and have the law struck down by the judiciary system. Now, it is hard for me to imagine how ignorant and bullheaded and out of touch someone has to be to so casually suggest that a poor person can improve their situation by paying tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to combat their government through the court system. Surprise, surprise, this cantankerous attitude is being espoused by Bill Colebrook, a police officer. What we're seeing here is exactly the attitude that police officers have toward their victims, and that attitude is that they can destroy people's lives and excuse themselves from responsibility. And Bill, I know you live in $1 million house on a golf course and you're really into your strict rules and laws and your homeowners association because you can price yourself above all that, but your posture toward the general public is an abomination of democracy, and I think it makes you unfit to be a representative. So I think you should withdraw your statement and apologize for that. But I know you won't because you're a police officer and you're obstinate, and that's the way you and your peers see all of the people around you. And this is exactly the same attitude we've seen in regards to the Aleyah Lewis arrest. Every perspective, every angle, every sentence presented by these police officers from Hillard Heintze is presented from the perspective that police officers should be able to screw up and cause problems, and innocent civilians should be made to pay for those mistakes. All we've learned here is that Mayor Marlin is so shallow that her notion of leadership in a difficult situation is that blowing $20,000 on a public relations circus is better than shouldering responsibility when the opportunity calls for it and affecting meaningful change. I believe this Hillard Heintze fiasco has had negative value for the city of Urbana. All that has been done is to waste time and money that we could have spent getting actual work done. Now, none of this is terribly surprising to anyone. What is surprising to me, and where I am personally greatly disappointed, is that most of the city council members have decided to take such an idle posture and allow this mess to continue. And that is the ultimate failure. And I think each of you should carefully reflect on that and consider if your actions are the actions of leaders or the actions of followers. I'll just mention something about this Gare situation that isn't being discussed tonight, but I suppose is being discussed next week. This really just sounds like another poster opportunity for me. You guys are going to sign up for another membership in something that just lets you put up a flowery poster in the halls of the city building. And you already passed the 10 shared principles and immediately started violating the tenets of transparency right after passing it. Urbana is regularly violating public records laws. So here we are months later, and I'm still waiting to see some honest conversations come out of the city council. I guess it's good that I haven't been holding my breath because it seems like we're just not going to get that. But I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Next up is Tracy Chong.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm Tracy Chong, resident of Urbana. The Hillard Heintze review of the UPD review is essentially a reactionary PR move by Mayor Marlin, with no meaningful review that cost Urbana taxpayers $20,000. Both the Urbana Police Review and the Hillard Heintze Review missed or purposely failed to address one of the most unsafe aspects of the arrest, where Officer Ruff's rifle was unsecured with the safety mechanism off during the whole struggle. Officer Ruff's weapon was ready to fire at just a trigger pull, which God forbid did not happen during the tussle. Deborah Kirby's response to Jared's question was just an embarrassment and so very, very dishonest. The Hillard Heintze report stated that the current policy is silent on the use of rifles during hands-on contact. But when asked if the team noticed that the weapon was ready to fire, Kirby said that they have to go back and see if it's against the policy. Wow, that was unbelievable to hear. This firm missed one of the biggest questionable aspects of the arrest, and their leader's response was as meaningless as it gets. Both the Urbana Police Review and the Hillard Heintze Review failed to address Officer Cervantes' initial actions that triggered the whole violent chain of events. Cervantes wrote in his report after the incident that he suspected that Lewis may be armed and dangerous. But still, Officer Cervantes put away his weapon, left the cover of his car, and then ran towards Lewis and then grabbed her hand, which led to the violent tussle. Maybe Cervantes thinks he's impermeable to bullets, but it blows my mind that an officer would put himself, his colleagues, and Lewis in such a position that now meant that each person's life was threatened and each person is fighting for self-preservation. What's more likely is that Officer Cervantes knew that Lewis was unarmed based on the 911 call where it was reported that it was the guy who had the gun. He thought he could silence Lewis because he felt disrespected, so he tried to arrest her. Instead, she tried to assert her rights, and that's when shit went downhill. To cover himself and the other officers, Cervantes and Ruff lied in the police reports that they suspected Lewis had a gun, and thus it was according to policy to defend themselves from the active assailant. I guess we will never formally know because the city spent $20,000 of taxpayers' money for a superficial review of a review that Mark Giuffre admitted that they did not look into this detail, this important detail. Yet somehow they managed to say that Urbana Police Department's investigation was all good when UPD failed to investigate this key issue. Hearing Deborah Kirby avoid giving direct or meaningful answers to the questions posed by City Council members and just referring back to policy and touting the improvements they suggested is terrible. By the way, these recommendations have been identified by residents and brought forward to City Council members, to Chief Seraphin, at no cost to the city. Mary Alice, you praised Kirby's thoroughness at producing the 911 call transcript. That transcript was played during Seraphin's presentation, published by media months ago, and read out word for word multiple times by residents during council meetings. And the transcript that Hillard Heintze produced is not even accurate. Yikes, what an embarrassment. Mayor Marilyn, you just got scammed and wasted $20,000 that could have been used for social issues that residents have been asking for week after week. I think it's quite troubling that the officers were absolved of any misconduct just because the actions were measured against a flawed and outdated use of force policy. Just because it's not stated explicitly in the policy that de-escalation should be a priority, that does not mean that it's okay to go and punch a civilian's head and knee them in the ribs. The public can see that this is wrong. I hope that you can see that this is wrong and how ridiculous it is that we are using $20,000 of taxpayer money to say that this is not wrong because de-escalation is not written in the policy. In the last CPRB special presentation, Dr. Michael Schlosser from the University of Illinois Police Training Institute gave a de-escalation presentation where he assured CPRB members and the public that UPD officers are trained and follow de-escalation techniques. Yet we still have Urbana police officers acting in direct contrast to what they are supposedly taught. Mr. Schlosser gave examples of language he teaches his trainees not to use. Yet we hear Urbana police officers using sexist, patronizing, and unprofessional language caught on video. However, there seems to be no hope of any form of accountability, even as the U of I Police Training Institute, represented by Dr. Schlosser, denies that his officers act that way. So what are you going to do about it? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next up is Felipe Monato.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. It's Felipe Monato. Good evening, members of the City Council. First, I actually want to thank Jared and Dennis for expressing their objections about putting public comment at the end of the meeting. It seems troubling that you really are actually pushing people to late hours of the night when you could actually have done this earlier. So again, my name is Felipe Monato, and I'm a proud resident, or actually used to be a proud resident of Urbana. So all through this summer, we have seen these meetings packed with public comment demanding action on racial justice in Urbana. I mean, we all have better things to do, but we think that, or we hope that we'll be doing different things, but this is actually what we feel compelled to do. Our community, I'm also myself, I'm appalled by the police assault on Aleyah Lewis and has made loud calls for the implementation of a real police review board, as well as the removal of the armed police from the Urbana schools. It should be clear by now that the people of Urbana want real action and change. This is probably the biggest rights movement of our generation, at least of my generation. It should also be clear that although we're tired, that we're sad, and we're frustrated by the state of our nation, we're not going away, even if you push public comment to the end of the meeting. What we're trying to do, civilly, is to use our collective voice to convince you to do what's right. I'm here again to express my concern with the presence of armed police in the Urbana schools. Many of us have cited many times the body of research showing that increased police presence does not result in safer school, but instead is correlated with increased juvenile incarceration. I'm here to tell you that last week, there was an incredible community push at the Urbana School Board meeting to eliminate the funding for armed police from the 2020-2021 school year budget. It was really moving to hear from so many community members, from middle and high school students, recent graduates, and parents demanding that armed police should be removed from schools and that the funds should be reallocated to restorative support and resources. The Urbana School District faces a budget shortfall of $1.5 million next year, and they cannot afford to spend $327,000 to pay the city for armed officers to police empty school buildings in Urbana. Well, the president of the Urbana School Board, Ann Hall, and board member Peggy Patton want to cancel the contract with the city. Most of the school board members are afraid of being sued by the city. I would like to ask the city council to send a clear signal that they won't be an obstacle in removing armed police from Urbana schools. Last year, when the contract was first proposed, the city council showed great leadership, and I'm grateful for that enabled the healthy discussion that the school board censored at that time, and this eventually resulted in some safeguards for the students, as well as a review protocol for the contract with the police. So I would humbly like to ask you again to provide the leadership that is sorely needed here. Listen to the calls from your community, and please do what's right. The City Council can step up and help rectify this error in governance that opposes the values of our community. Please cancel the contract and allow the removal of armed police from Urbana schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Elizabeth Simpson.
Good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you for your time. My name is Elizabeth Simpson. I've lived in Urbana since 2001. I've been a professional facilitator and consultant for governmental and non-governmental groups since 1999, including doing community-wide sessions after the murder of Q1 Carrington, prior to the hiring of Chief Cobb, and other community initiatives. I have a master's in communication. I've been doing PhD research on effective small group practices with an emphasis on anti-oppression topics for the last 5 years. And I say that because I'm about to give you an evaluation of my experience of the listening session with the community that Hillard Heintze did. And I want you to know that I have the credentials to make this assessment. The session was initiated in relation to police misconduct and use of force, which means that these sessions could lead to the presence or absence of changes that would result in citizens getting hurt or killed or not. So if this undertaking is done to actually have some meaningful outcomes, it matters whether it's well done or not. And it also costs a lot of money. So again, in terms of efficiency, it matters whether it is well done or not. So as a professional facilitator of 20 years and as a researcher for the last 7 years, I can say with absolute confidence that the claim on the opening page of the Lewis report that the information was collected with investigative diligence is absolutely absurd. The data gathering in the listening session was so poorly designed that I cannot believe this is a national firm currently doing police review work in over 10 cities, unless the purpose is simply to do a display of fanfare with no intention to make meaningful change. I did only participate in a listening session, so I can't speak to the complete range of the work that was undertaken. However, it was so poor that I really have strong concerns about the veracity of the rest of the findings. The report says that there was a 15 to 20-minute presentation. That is not true. It was an hour presentation out of a 90-minute session, which means that the group who got together was only used for maybe 20 minutes. After that hour of presentation, we had 20 minutes in a small group. The report says we were given a questionnaire. We were not. We were emailed the questionnaire in advance. We were not told we would have to somehow have access to it at the time. That questionnaire was in a PDF form. It was unfillable. We were told that we needed to somehow collect everybody's responses, numeric responses, collate them ourselves, create the average ourselves, and then report that out to the group, which is absurd. Then after doing that, we only had 6 minutes left to answer our 7 open-ended questions. And as I'm sure you know, if you have a group of 5 people with 6 minutes answering 7 questions, you get basically no answers. But even if we had answers, there was no representative from the group to take any notes from the consulting group. And so people just kind of talked. And when we were supposed to report out, the person who reports just sort of says what's on their mind. So in terms of actually trying to make an assessment of community perspectives, it was a total failure. So just to clarify again, an hour of presentation, giving us the quantitative work. We could have got that quantitative stuff done with a survey. I could have done this report myself, this aspect of it, just far more effectively. And what this means is that if you're just getting reports out of whoever's speaking, you're going to get their perspectives instead of a sort of research-based outcome of what is actually the wisdom in the room. So in the future, if you want something more effective, you could hire me. But also you could just listen to the community, because we have been speaking since April. And as someone recently said just now in input, we have already told you over and over again the results, research-based, et cetera. I mean, we have a huge panel of expertise in our community, and we keep giving you our labor for free. We didn't need a review to know what the community has been demanding, which is to deprioritize police funding, prioritize actual community safety through non-police responses to disputes, mental health, and neighborhood concerns. And finally, that the results and the findings that the use of force in the case of Ms. Lewis is consistent with UPD policy, and I'm quoting from the report here, that the finding was the use of force in the case of Ms. Lewis is consistent with UPD policy. This is just a fact. It's not relief. It is a confirmation that UPD policies are not in alignment with the needs of community, and they indicate a pretty much sure thing that there will be future harm in our community to our community members. And for those of us who have been watching consistently City Council now for almost 6 months, we know that it is your role. We know you have a role. We've been waiting for you to speak out about this, to take a stance about this, and it has not happened. And I personally will continue to hold you responsible for your role in leadership. At the same time, as I always close with you, I know you're doing a lot of work. I know you're trying, and especially as a white person in these times, we have to throw down harder and not just have this sort of report thing, because we've already known what to do. We've been telling you what to do for 6 months. It's not that you need more information. What we need you to do and what you need to do is to take action. And I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, can I interject something?
Yes, you can, May Alice.
I'd just like to make a motion to extend the meeting to 11 p.m. to get in all the public input of the people whose hands are raised.
I'd second that.
Okay, Mary Alice with the motion, Julie with the second. Is there any discussion?
I may have to leave early because I have something I have to do.
Okay, understood. Clerk, can you call the roll?
Yeah, just a second.
You might need to limit to 3 or 4 minutes though to get it, because there's, if you do the math at 5 times 9.
Okay,
I don't know
Miss.
the rules if we've started to allow 5 minutes when, or if we can curtail to 3.
Okay. Just sorry, I didn't know. Sorry.
Yeah, I just don't know that rule since we started with 5.
Sorry.
Miss Wu,
Yes.
Miss Lout,
Yes.
Miss Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mayor Marlin. Okay, she must have stepped away.
Well, with that, the motion passes. The
Yes.
extended.
Okay.
The mayor
I'm here.
said yes.
All right, thank you.
So the motion has passed. The meeting has been extended to 11 o'clock.
We have 9 left, Bill, at 5 minutes each. That would be 45 minutes. We have 40 minutes left. So I think maybe we'll just go with what we were doing. I think it'd be best. Maybe there won't be a full 5 minutes for somebody.
Somebody just got added too. So I've got next up Commander Ezra. Was that the next on the list?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Jane McClintock. Sorry for the Zoom mistake. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Well, thanks for sticking with us and thanks for sticking up for us, Jared, because it's really important to have input, and we've put a lot of time into reading this report, which we didn't exactly ask for it, and trying to understand it and honestly, I think the community understands this arrest a lot better than our quote unquote experts who didn't know how to pronounce Kamarian or exactly what happened. I was trying to scribble down the factual explanation that did not exactly comply with my understanding of what happened in the incident and couldn't really keep up. So I agree with much of what has been said already. I really think that there's no reason the city shouldn't act immediately on these blaring inadequacies in our use of force policy, which community has been telling you about, and now apparently if you needed it, you have experts who have told you, quote unquote experts, who I have some questions about, but we really need de-escalation. We need that in the policy. We need to make it clear to our officers what our expectations are. And clearly just fixing these holes, just asking them not to use racist, sexist, and disrespectful language is not enough, but it's a place to start. So let's get that in the policy immediately. And you can see that the community is asking for much, much more. So please, let's move on this. Let's move honestly on this. Also, it's a terrifying realization about the safety on the gun. I sent you guys some pictures just for your reference. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. And yeah, I don't know. It's like you guys said, it's kind of hard to be 100% here at this time of night. So I will pass it on to Danielle Chenoweth and let her say her piece.
Hello. So hundreds of folks have spoken and demanded justice for Aleyah and real change in policing in Urbana. I do want to comment on the report provided by Hillard Heintze. I'll call them HH. So this is the contradiction in their report. 2 things. 1, the public argued for a civil rights investigation and the city ordered a review of police procedure. There are some benefits to that, which I will get to. Second, I really want to emphasize the contradiction in their report. On the one hand, it deeply criticizes the gaps in the use of force policy, and then it absolves the police of wrongdoing as measured against this fundamentally flawed and dangerous use of force policy. So what you can do going forward is work on the use of force policy, but I want to point out a few other gaps that we'll have to look at. One is we still need accountability for the police brutality committed against Aleyah Lewis, who is again in court today and is facing prison time and multiple felony charges. The second is we need to review the role of racial profiling, racism, and sexism, and the way it played out in this arrest. I was deeply disappointed that there was no commentary on that in the report. third, we really have to fix the broken complaint process. I think a laughable part of the report is that they say no formal complaint alleging excessive force was received, so internal affairs did not investigate the incident. In fact, hundreds of written complaints were made to the city, including an eyewitness who complained directly to the mayor. Multiple formal complaints were filed. There have been dismissals. It's been in violation with UPD policy 323, internal investigations, that states it is the policy of the Urbana Police Department to investigate all claims of misconduct by employees. Third, we are missing public access to the use of force policy, which is heavily redacted or partially redacted. I mean, body camera footage and police reports, and even the HH report itself, only 3 of the 13 attachments of the report were released to the council or the public. And then I really want to address the fact that there was such the description of the incident was watching a fish get bigger and bigger as current and former law enforcement weigh in and warp the truth. This whole idea that somehow Lewis has assaulted and struck Cervantes, which started as actually her reeling back and turned into her throwing an uppercut, it's like it just keeps growing. The reps say a gun can be concealed in a shoe, crotch, or back pocket, but they failed to notice she was wearing flip-flops and pajama pants. The report says Cervantes gave verbal commands, and yet he gave no commands prior to putting his hands on her, unless you consider you not fixing to go home, you fixing to go to jail as a clear directive, which is the language that they criticize in the report. They say that Ruff struck Lewis, but they remove in the head. This is clearly spin. I could go on. Now, let me just point out what you can do. You can make legislation by making a motion to fix the use of force policy that is shown to be outdated, inadequate, and dangerous. De-escalation is entirely absent. There's no guidelines or limits on use of force for individuals in restraint, which is terrifying to find out. Their policy is silent about the danger of positional asphyxiation. It's silent about use of rifles during hands-on contact with residents. There's inadequate training and process for use of force investigations. And then, of course, we have the issue of the language. And it's really important to note that the report itself says that civilians who are the subject of an officer's use of force are potentially the best witnesses because of their physical proximity to the force used, which is a very strange Orwellian kind of statement. But the issue is they themselves did not follow this in their own investigation. They commit the same offense that they're arguing against. They say that you should go through the attorney, and they never reached out to her attorney to get any side. So it's very one-sided investigation. But I do think the key nugget, the kind of gold in this, is that they've really laid out a pathway for you to make use of force changes, and you should demand this of your chief. And you should move forward with those pieces as one piece of the larger puzzle. And thank you so much for staying so late, listening to us. And even after our children are going to bed, have gone to bed, we can get input to you on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Danielle. So next up is Justin Michael.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Justin Michael Hendricks. I'm a Champaign-Urbana resident, Parkland College student. I'll start off and begin with Diane. How was the anti-Black Lives Matter protests covered up by Back the Blue? Was it for pleasure or political gain? I think we all should know. I'm very upset that a percentage of my tax dollars went to supporting cops who think it's cool to victimize Black and brown women. Did we really need $20,000 to review to witness violence and assault on individuals by cops? No, we did not, and that's very dirty of you, Diane, and you should know it. I feel like you all should know that personally. I feel like you know them personally too. That's why they investigated the case. Are you supporting these actions by the cops? I seriously would like to know a yes or no answer for the people who voted on you for that chair. It's up soon, by the way. I hear more about the cop's thumb than Aleyah's injuries. Let's stop if we want to be fully transparent. We're not worried about a thumb. We're worried about her livelihood here. What you have done was continue the silencing of Black women and girls. What you have done is erase the practices of little protection that Black women and girls have at all. To know that the head punches and knees to the backs are allowed on a young lady that was nowhere near the men's weight, nor near their weight class, even if she had quadrupled their weight. Can we please have the weight on these individuals compared to Aleyah? I don't know anybody willing to let someone 4 times their size to be forcible with body weight on them. I wouldn't even let them lay on me that far for that long. Did she have to grab his gun or reach for the gun because it was clear she never had a gun at all? So why, with all his years of experience, will he feel threatened or in fear to believe that he would have to resort to gunplay when she's trying to get away from 3 huge men? He could have killed her. She could have been killed, especially at the rate of how Black lives are being killed by blue lives that you all back. Don't be dirty, do better. Drop the charges and charge the cops. Release their priors as well, because we want to know what the history is. Or stand up to them and say something, Diane. Say something that you support them so that we know where you really stand when it comes to physical attacks against Aleyah Lewis and other Black women and girls when encountering the law enforcement. And that's for all city council as well as we're talking. Included, as we're all playing a lot to this game, and my tax dollars are included. Give me my money back, because I think it's foolery that y'all had to sit here and pay for that foolish investigation and pulled it off with a stunt. And then you have to include it in the News Gazette as well? Why? We understand that you're limited, but be aware that we're watching and we're mindful at all. Jared, thank you for everything that you're doing. You're speaking out for it. This is why we say defund the police and reframe the justice system, because you failed us all, but yet to protect us, as Tracy and Danielle has exposed your case of misconduct and abuse that you're denying. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Next up is Bo David Barber.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
So my name is Bo Barber. I'm from Ogden, Illinois. So I just kind of wanted to speak on one thing before I had to kind of comment about the Hillard Heintze investigation. I wanted to reiterate Alan Axelrod's point about the Ameren shutoffs and the American water shutoffs. It's on September 11th. That has 2 meanings for me. That's my birthday, and then that's also the day of the September 11th terrorist attacks. I don't like celebrating my birthday anymore. I hate it. But it's not about me. It's about, you know, the 3,000 people that died that day, and the fact that, you know, we need to do something. We need to do something to make sure that we are not going to lead to another surge of massive death. There's already over 160,000 people that have died across the nation because of this. And if water shutoffs and utility shutoffs occur, in the best case scenario, people's lives will be ruined, people's access to education will be cut off, people's ability to work remotely will be just destroyed. And that's the best case. In the worst case scenario, in the likely scenario, people die. People will die. That's no embellishment. That's no just making this, you know, exaggerating. People will die if their power utilities are shut off and their water is shut off during a pandemic. So I urge you to take some kind of action, because if this is what happens on September 11th, we're going to remember it for 2 reasons. And that's, you know, people say never forget 9/11 and the thousands of people and the firefighters that died, that sacrificed their lives to save people. And it would just be an injustice and a disgrace to all the people that died on that day to not have tried to do something to stop other lives from being lost. That being said, I hope I have enough time to get to the rest of my comment here, but about the Hillard Heintze investigation. So, as said by many people before, you know, I'm probably going to sound a little bit redundant here, but I mean, dang, you have to go after Tracy Chong. I mean, God, I don't know how some of y'all still have jobs after Tracy Chong just pulls all the receipts here. But Brian Serafin said on record on August 27th that de-escalation was not used because it was not appropriate due to the presence of a gun. I would ask the council and anyone on this call to think about this, because why would you try and solve a situation where you believe something could become violent by escalating it into the violence and making it worse, and not trying to de-escalate to prevent the violence? That confounds me. The Heintze investigation only proved that UPD followed the policy to the letter. It does not mean the policy is right. It does not mean the policy is racist. It does not prove, or it does not disprove that it disproportionately brutalized and traumatizes people of color and minorities, and it did not prove that this actually helps to prevent violence. Instead, in the report itself from the community survey portion, as well as the weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of our public comment, week in, week out, every single night, that the public does not trust the police. In the community survey portion, it said they want more transparency, they want less funds to go to the police, they don't want the police department. They believe that the police department does not have the protection and welfare of the Black community in their best interest in that report. And this is sadly just another demonstration of the lack of good faith by the municipal government of Urbana, especially you, Mayor Marlin. What were some other ones that you may ask? I'm glad you hypothetically asked me, Diane. Well, currently, one of your council members is just a replacement cop on the council who would rather rubber stamp whatever you hand down to him without considering the impact on the community, because he was only appointed to this position by you with the request of the previous cop. That makes sense, though, that you would do that, seeing that you were backed by police unions during your campaign for office, which you proudly touted until recent months. Let's not forget your most recent display of bad faith acting when you attended the Back the Blue rally the other week, where several people on camera from WCIA showed people were not wearing masks, not socially distancing, yet you come to every city council meeting proclaiming COVID-19 to be a serious community health issue. Don't get me wrong, it is a serious health issue. So what the heck were you doing there? Back the Blue and Blue Lives Matter is a racist group that was made in direct opposition to Black Lives Matter. So what are you saying? You want to make a statement on that at some point later? Do what you got to do, but it's clear cut and dry racism. I will give you props for the one sliver of truth you imparted to us once. You said that Bryant Serafin was one of the good ones, that he follows this department's policies very closely. You're correct, he does follow the department policies very closely. It's just too bad that this policy is both violent and racist, and Bryant Serafin is more than delighted to enforce such a policy. Glad you spent almost $20,000 of your constituents' tax dollars to figure that out. You fund the police, fund the community and its people, drop the charges against Aleyah Lewis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Next up is Megan Miracle.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
So I want to start out and say I'm just kind of baffled by the response tonight and the devaluing of time by moving public input until the last minute. I hope you account for this in the future by creating additional time for public comment and holding your promise to the community. A lot of what I'm going to say is going to be reiterating what other people have said and spoken very well on tonight, but I think it's worth saying again. So to start, the members of the community who have been consistently calling into city council meetings did not ask for this review and raised significant concerns about Hillard Heintze, their credentials, and their association with police officers. The review raises substantial concerns about the UPD use of force policy and then attempts to absolve the officers involved in the assault of Aleyah Lewis using that same use of force policy that has been found wanting. All of this obscures the fact that what happened on April 10th should never have happened. It is a direct result of the actions that the police officers involved took on that day to escalate and inflict harm. The very fact that we cannot find them at fault, while also stating that existing policies fail to protect the community from the violent institution of policing, shows us the problems that are at the heart of our criminal justice system and society as a whole. We cannot excuse the violence and racism and sexism of the Urbana police just because they exist within a system in which violence, racism, and sexism are not explicitly condemned. We need to change the system and hold these officers accountable simultaneously. Beyond that, I want to emphasize one major point about this review. So as others have said, Hillard Heintze claims to have conducted learning sessions that represent a broad swath of Urbana community members, but out of only 50 residents who were invited, which I have lots of questions about why only 50 residents were invited in the first place, only 18 responded, which equates to 0.04 of the population of Urbana, much less than the number of people who have already called and emailed to share their feedback directly. Mayor Marlin has repeatedly emphasized that Hillard Heintze was selected because of their ability to elicit feedback from the public, but this report has failed to even come close to this goal. As a qualitative researcher myself, I can tell you that the questionnaire provided in the appendix of the review is poorly designed and contains obfuscated questions such as, what do you think would help the community feel officers are being held accountable when force is used? Which implicitly suggests that the problem with officer accountability is a problem of perception, not a problem of lack of true justice. The questions lead those taking the questionnaire to come up with abstracted reasons why use of force is necessary, rather than digging into the harm and problems that use of force causes. And the questionnaire and vague recruitment materials fail to mention racism or discrimination at all. And the report, in fact, fails to do this as well, avoiding a systemic conversation in order to restrict respondents' answers to in-person encounters with UPD, asking them to report instances of force along a confusing scale that goes from appropriate to zealous to too much to excessive. It became clear through tonight's presentation that the range of the review was highly restricted, as it couldn't even extend to firearm use fully. There's also the continued problem with how the word reasonable is being weaponized to cover all police actions, but erase the trauma experienced by the victims of police brutality. I think there are two main conclusions the City Council should draw from this report. One, it is clear based on the feedback that was received and the feedback that you have been receiving for months that there is a lot of work to be done. To be clear, this review is not the work. I implore you not to treat this review as your indication that you've done something. This review will not get the charges against Aleyah Lewis dropped. You've been clear about that. It does not address the racism at the heart of policing. Secondly, I recommend that you look closely at the assumptions at the heart of this review and the way that it's framed first and foremost as a defense of police and policing, not a legitimate reflection of the experiences and input of the community. But you could always look back through the hundreds of emails and hours of public comment for that. Defund the police, abolish the police, actually do something for Aleyah Lewis and the 27 protesters arrested on May 31st. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Megan. Next up is Brian Dunn.
Good evening. My name is Brian Dunn. I live in Champaign. I just wanted to comment on the report on the Aleyah Lewis case, basically solidifying my opinion that police, as they currently stand, are never going to be able to, do their job in a way that does not oppress members of the community. I think it's unfair to police, as it is unfair to our community members. If you truly believe Blue Lives Matter, we need to take it upon ourselves to reshape policing, to abolish it as it currently stands, and to revision public safety in a way that doesn't put people in these positions as a default, where you have a man, three men on top of a woman, and one of them sees fit to punch her in the back of the head, supposedly because he believes she may have a gun underneath her or something like that. His aim is not to grab her arms or to, flip her over, search her. No, his aim is to punch her in the back of the head. That is just a person looking to hurt another person. And, judging by all humans I've ever interacted with, I'm not surprised. It's a situation that no one is going to be acting responsibly in, regardless what the guidelines in some policy are. And we need to think critically and sensibly about what we are putting people through. Policing and policy has a long way to catch up to get to current public sentiment. We understand that there are better places now that we could be investing these dollars. We don't need police in school. We don't need police responding to the majority of the calls that they respond to. We don't need police pulling people over and telling them they have the wrong sticker on the back of their car. We're welcoming these situations that, result in police killing people and community members losing their lives. No one wants to be in these situations. This is an unprecedented time in our country's history. This is the time to make big moves. If anything, the report given tonight just shows that we don't have a system that we need to reform. We have a system that we need to do away with. That transformation will most likely be slow. It will most likely, not be perfect. And that's all the more reason to start now. We need to convince ourselves first that there is a better way to treat each other. And then we can go about creating that change in the community. So this is about everyone working together. Blue lives aren't actually a thing because that's just a career. But if you're truly, wanting the best for everyone in the community, that includes the police in the community. And I think that we need to be removing them from a lot of the situations that we put them in. And we also need to be building better systems to care for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Catherine Majewski.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I'm going to keep this relatively brief because I think that much of what I would like to say has already been said and somewhat more eloquently than I could probably manage. But I would like to back Laura Orr and Nate Wall and Felipe Monato and the other people who have spoken in favor of USD 116 canceling the school resource officer contract with the city. I think a lot of my concerns have already been fairly well stated here. It's astonishing to me, frankly, that this is an issue here. We are funding. I have self-planned out. I completely lost my train of thought. I am so sorry. It's a very late night. Public comment has been pushed quite late, and I would like to state my thanks to those of you who have spoken up in favor of not postponing it, because this is the result. But yes, continuing to fund school resource officers during a pandemic when students are already traumatized. I mean, there has been much said already on the effects of this on student engagement, student performance, student trauma, you know, the intersections with various other concerns that students may face. But connecting this particularly to the Hillard Heintze investigation, I want to point out the rather staggering lack of established policy or consistent policy on de-escalation, on use of force. Why are we putting this in schools with minors? It is frankly astonishing to me. That makes absolutely no sense that this is something that we deem to be acceptable. These are reactive solutions to things that can much better be handled proactively through things like counseling and early intervention. It is, I don't have words. I had words and I am astonishingly frustrated. I don't have words. This is why I typically email, but I have very little confidence that my emails aren't just vanishing into the ether. So I felt it necessary to put public input tonight. So yes, I would like to back the call to cancel the SRO contract. And I would like to emphasize that the city should not pose barriers to the school board's attempt to do this, should that be voted through. And I will use the last little bit of time to reiterate a couple of things I've emailed about. Police also shouldn't be involved with mental health interventions. They should not be first responders on that. And I would also like to back up the call for justice and dropping the charges against Aleyah Lewis and the protesters arrested on May 31st. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Next up is Rita Connerly.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
I do apologize for any interruptions. I am currently on the road traveling. However, I am very disappointed. I'm sorry, I'll start over. My name is Rita Connerly. I reside in Champaign, Urbana. And I'll start off by saying I'm very disappointed that I just sat and listened to a 2-hour explanation of a justification. 2 hours of listening to how your allies, Hillard and Heintze, or whatever their name is, found nothing wrong about what the public has seen as police brutality. So what we've seen is incorrect, and what has been filmed is not credible. We've even heard your experts speak of the punches and the knees to the body that Aleyah experienced, but then made excuses as far as why it was okay. Even excusing the way the white officer spoke to this black woman, a clear display of patriarchal whitewash society. Over $16,000 to hire an agency of experts that has found that Urbana's police were in compliance, while noting there were some areas that could have been
Ma'am, we're losing you.
improved. However, to me, it sounds like they justified racism and sexism. It really took someone from the outside to vouch for your inabilities to properly serve in their duties as officers.
the failures of their chief to discipline those officers, and Diane's feelings about
Ms. Connerly, we're losing you.
her staff, which interferes with her poor choices and trickles down from the top, excuse me. As a Black woman, a survivor of domestic violence, why are we seeking to protect police in their department, which historically we know was created to capture nigger slaves? As a Black woman, understand how discredited, misrepresented, and devalued we are. Not properly protected by our own, yet we are expected to believe that our local authorities will serve and protect us. As a Black woman, we normalize abuse. We become reliant on trauma, and because of the acceptance by society, sometimes have no outside support to get out. There is such a distrust of institutions. Oftentimes, women feel forced to stay in a bad situation. Look at the Aleyah Lewis case specifically. Since we want to talk and discuss hypotheticals, then hypothetically, remove all labels and titles. Had that been a Black man on top of a white woman, he would have been arrested and questioned later. In that case, it would have been, it would not have been innocent until proven guilty. For Aleyah, there's definitely no justice, as she is still the victim twice over. Once for domestic violence, and the other, police brutality. Now being targeted by the judicial systems attempting to criminalize her. Further, had she been a white woman, we know things would have been much different, and officers would have been rewarded for acting as a savior to a damsel in distress. Shame on you, Urbana, and many of the members that sit on this council. How can you sleep peacefully knowing that this young girl's life may be over simply for trying to get help? This is why I continue to support defunding the police, reinvesting in communities, because those same communities that you're trying to criminalize, you need to be investing in. The cultural influences of Black women does not equal to the protection of them. So I ask, when do we take time to sit back and ask the victim, Aleyah Lewis, how's she doing? The same way you were concerned about an officer's thumb, what about Aliyah's body? What support can we provide to offer helpful solutions that aid in healing? What restorative practices do you seek to implement? What other forms of rehabilitation can benefit our community and our citizens over incarcerating them? If only for a moment, imagine Aleyah was your loved one. Although many of you wouldn't want to because you revel in your privilege, but if for a moment, imagine your skin being the reason for the overreactive ways white America treats and interacts with you. Also, cancel contracts for officers in the schools. Why do we need armed guards in our prisons? In our schools. I mean, why are we reinforcing the school to prison pipeline? Why? Especially when the data shows the disparities. It shows that Black and brown children are being issued more discipline, referrals, and arrests. So I'll end with justice for Aleyah, RSOs out of school, and drop all the charges against what you guys are considering rioters and looters from those who were protesting as relates to the racial injustices faced every day by Black and browns. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll have time for one more. I believe that is Megan Mcdonald.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
All right, great. Hello, Mayor Marlin, if she's still on this call, and the rest of the City Council. My name is Megan Mcdonald. I'm from Ward 5. I originally wasn't going to show up today. I was going to take a break because this morning was Aliyah's court date, and it's been a long day of just, actually supporting people in this community and not trying to police them and put them away for life for being Black, for being alive in America. Anyway, so it's been a long day and it's 11 o'clock at night, and I hopped on just to kind of, make it worth our time. I show up every week, and I think you all are gonna keep hearing from us and keep having late meetings, and you're just gonna have to deal with that until you make significant changes to city policy, to police policy, to defunding the police, to essentially abolishing the police, and you know, shifting those responsibilities from them and creating a new community and a new way to interact with each other where everyone gets to feel safe. So yeah, I didn't really prepare anything today because I didn't expect to be on this, but you kept it going so long and you put public input at the end, hoping that people would fall asleep, or that like you could get through stuff more quickly. Like, I don't think this went any more quickly than any other meetings that we've had for the last few months. So I don't know what the point was, just making it less accessible. You chose Hillard Heintze apparently because of their ability to solicit public feedback, but then you do everything in your power to be unclear about public input directions. You consistently keep us at 3 minutes instead of the allotted 5, or you did, you know, up until about 2 weeks ago. You consistently kept us at 3 minutes instead of the allotted 5, even when there were less than 20 people. You stopped reading emails. So I would just like to point out the real reason you chose Hillard Heintze, in case it wasn't obvious to, you know, anyone on the council or anyone listening, is they're retired and active police officers. That's literally who works for Hillard Heintze. So the city spent almost $20,000. Mayor Marlin, you know, literally chose to spend $20,000. I don't think the council was consulted. So spent $20,000 for cops to investigate cops. There wasn't any facilitated public input on who this firm should be, on like what the steps should even be, like to check if the police, like, you know, use of force policy was in line or not. Like Brian Dunn said earlier, like the police have a lot to catch up on as far as like public like thought about how we interact with each other and how we keep each other safe. And I don't think Hillard Heintze was maybe even the move to go about, like, you know, did the cops do the right thing? Like, no, like, just like look at the video, like ask yourself, like, does that look right? And if you can think, yes, that looks right. Like, I just, exactly. Like Kit said, like, how can you sleep at night? Or somebody else said that. Anyway, yeah, Kit, I'm tired too. Solidarity. Anyway, how much time do I have left? I have 1 minute and 30 seconds. So I will take that time because I have had so much of my time taken away from me trying to do y'all's job. Your job is to listen to the community. Your job is to take care of this community. Your job is to make Urbana be the place that we all want it to be, that we all thought it was, that a lot of us who were white and privileged, like we had experienced it as, and you know, the curtains pulled back. Like, so look at it and do something about it. Jared is basically the only one up there advocating for any kind of real change. Julie, I hope you do too. Like, I know that you're sick of, or you know, might be sick of public comment or whatever, but like, this is how it's going to be. This is how it's going to keep being, because Aleyah Lewis and the protesters from May 31st at Marketplace Mall, like, they're scared. Like, their lives are literally in danger. They're worried about how they're going to eat, like how they're going to live. Like, they can't sleep at night. A lot of them didn't do anything wrong. And even if they did, no one's life deserves to end by police brutality, by the mass incarceration system. Like, that's not your job to just decide who lives and who dies. So do your job and take care of this community. Thanks.
Thank you. So real quick, got emails today, basically subject of Hillard Heintze, got emails from Sharon Irish, John Hayes, Julie Watkins, so I don't butcher his first name, Mr. Cisneros, Anne-Marie Esposito, and Danielle Chenoweth. Regarding SROs, got emails from Danielle McFarland, Naomi Pig, Sarah Hogue, Amina Payne. Regarding Hillard Heintze and traffic stop data, Daryl Cruz. The agenda order, John Hayes, and then gun rifle safety, Jane McClintock. So that's the end of our agenda items. Is there any more business from the council? If not, we're gonna have to extend real quick. Seeing no business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.